local control funding formula, state policy deliberation, and local community engagement, a webinar series presented by Children Now.
Okay, hi everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. This is Jelena Hasbrook with Children Now, so I'm going to turn it over to Ted Lempert, President of Children Now.
Thanks very much, Jelena, and welcome everybody, and appreciate you all joining for the second in a series of webinars on implementing the local control funding formula. And we think these webinars are important just so there's a common source of information for a wide range of folks who are involved in the implementation. On the webinar today, we have state organizations and advocacy groups, a range of local organizations, school districts, policymakers, and folks really involved in a wide range of areas. And we really think it's important for that diversity of folks to have common sorts of information on what's going on at the state level, and then some tips in terms of how implementation is going to occur in school districts throughout the state. And just one note to that, and I know there's folks on the phone who have very focused interests, whether it's school climate, arts education. A number of folks on the webinar have a particular focus on early learning and development. And as later on in this webinar, we're going to talk a lot about really starting to plan for very active community engagement and involvement, and some tips for folks on the phone who are really looking to some guidance towards that end. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Debra Brown, who will take you through the next number of slides. Debra?
Thank you, Ted. Welcome, everybody. What we're going to try to look for, as we lay out what's happening, we kind of want to provide you a quick update on what's been happening at a state level since our last webinar a little over a month ago, and then kind of walk you through some of the key decision points that are being asked within the development of the new fiscal regulations. And after we sort of laid that framework, talk about and provide options for staying engaged in the state policy process, and then translating that to what you can do locally in your communities and your districts to prepare for implementation of LCFF. And so with that, we'll transition to the what's new. So what's happened since the last webinar? In addition to the state board having the conversations at the community forums in August and the state board meeting just last week, there's also been some discussion of LCFF and the local control accountability plans in the legislature. And so there's a couple of vehicles that we'll be following, that we are following, and that we'll provide update to that help frame it a little bit. And so there's some AB 103 and also SB 97 are duplicate measures that are providing some mostly technical cleanup issues. As you can imagine, changing the funding formula, as well crafted as you can try to be, there are some issues that do need to be cleaned up. And so the expectation is that will happen with AB 103 or SB 97. They're working their way through the legislative process now. There's also another measure, SB 344, that has been evolving over the year. This is Senator Padilla's measure, primarily related to English learners, but with the adoption of the local control funding formula, it's evolved into an effort as to how to merge some of those concerns and the desire to strengthen assurances for English learners in that. And so what it really is trying to do is, within the framework and context of LCFF and the LCAPs, it's specifying some of the requirements. So it's looking at the fiscal requirements that we'll get into a little bit more detail now, and making sure that those are integrated throughout the budget and auditing process. And then it's also adding reclassified learners and as a subgroup in the API, and then also for purposes of addressing student needs within the LCAP. And that measure is moving its way to the governor's desk, and the expectation is that it will arrive there as well. And then looking through the key decisions, so now that we're sort of at where we're at in terms of any changes to LCFF, what's before us now and what's before the state in terms of what's being decided is the state board needs to adopt regulations related to the fiscal rules for supplemental and concentration dollars, and the legislature specifies that they need to do that by this coming January. And another key issue is a format for the local control accountability template. So the template that all districts, county offices, and charter schools will need to use when they adopt their plans this coming June. And the board has until March to adopt that template. And then another issue is when will districts know, I should say districts, county offices, and charters know their funding levels in the current year, and then obviously as that transitions for the 2014-15 school year. And it's possible that that will happen as late as this coming July.
So as Debra mentioned, the first major milestone before the state board is the adoption of the fiscal regs around supplemental concentration dollars. In order to better understand what is grounding that deliberation around the regulations, we thought we'd walk you through two critical elements. First, some of the key perspectives that are being brought to bear by the stakeholders who are engaged up and down the state. And second, a series of key questions in an attempt to really break down the larger requirement into subparts, because they're all interrelated and they need to be addressed in order to ultimately come up with regulations before the board. So first, around the policy, the perspectives that are being brought to bear. There are two overarching themes that are really being woven throughout the stakeholder and policy conversation to date. First, the importance of allowing the flexible use of resources, and then the demonstration of investments in equity. Both of these goals, they're core tenets of LCFF. It's what we were talking about as we were working collectively to get this legislation passed. It's grounded in decades of research and on-the-ground experience of educators and community leaders. Both of these goals were critical to getting LCF passed, and they have merit. And so we think it's really important to make sure that they're well understood in that process. And so let's unpack them a little bit more. First, the call for the flexible use of resources. What we know from research and practice on the ground is that one of the most effective ways to improve student outcomes is to approach it with a systems approach, to really create coherence between your different systems. So for example, ensuring that your curriculum, your data, your professional development, all of your support services are aligned. And in order to do that, it requires some flexibility in how you deploy resources, both to create those systems and create alignment, and also in that kind of continuous improvement process where we're refining and trying to address what's working, what's not working. And so there's a lot of on-the-ground experience and research that shows that having that ability to flexibly use resources is helpful in creating coherence. In addition, and similarly, what we're also seeing is that in order to really be responsive to the individual kid, the school site, the broader community, that having the ability to modify the supports and services and programs that are offered based on changing needs and new knowledge is really essential, and that similarly requires a lot of flexibility. In addition, as we are in the process of going through the implementation, we also recognize there are fiscal constraints and issues that districts are dealing with that are very different across the state. So districts are in different places. So what we thought we would do is try to represent this visually to the extent we could. And as you'll notice, we lift up 4 major elements. The first is around reserve levels. So a number of districts up and down the state made very deep cuts to the core program in order to build up their reserves and make sure that they were able to weather the uncertainty of Prop 30, whether it was going to be approved or fail or not pass. And so, we're seeing some districts who are in that position. Other districts were doing minor deficit spending during the downturn, but probably can quickly, over the next year or two, start building up their reserve levels to be in a place where they're in legal compliance. Finally, there are a number of districts up and down the state who are in the process of severe deficit spending, and this year, even though they may be getting new resources, are going to be required to continue cutting to bring their budgets into balance. And so we have districts at varying places on that continuum. In addition, as we mentioned earlier, in order to weather the downturn and the deep cuts to public education, districts and county offices and charter schools had to make cuts to their core program, and that is varying across the state. In addition, just by virtue of how we've structured the LCFF in order to make the system more rational over time, the growth in LCFF funding is grounded in historically what you've received, communities received for resources from the state, and what their student demographics are. And so districts are going to be growing at different rates, and those different rates will impact their local implementation. Finally, another piece that I think is important to lift up, that as we've been talking with district leaders up and down the state, is varying degrees of alignment between what is being generated ultimately under our, once we meet our LCFF target, what's being generated under the base, what's being generated under supplemental concentration dollars, and the alignment or misalignment between the base dollars and current district expenditures that are district-wide. And so some districts, this is not an issue. The alignment's fine, and they'll be able to grow quickly. Some, it's going to take two or 3 years for things to match up. And then in other places, there is some severe misalignment. And so these different contextual fiscal constraints are important to note. And it's also important to note that districts are in varying places. And so, for example, we know of some districts who are in red when it comes to the reserve level. They're in green in terms of the growth in funding, and they may be in yellow as it relates to alignment of funds. Other districts who are green in the reserve levels, yellow in terms of growth and yellow in terms of alignment. And again, the combination of factors, it does vary across the state. So this is an important undercurrent in the policy debate and policy deliberations, and it's also an important piece as we think about local implementation. So in addition to the call for flexibility in the use of resources, there is also a strong desire for a demonstrated investment in equity. Again, the research, local practice, just common sense shows that kids who come with less need more to reach the outcomes that our economy and our society and our democracy demand. And we also know that there is compelling research that shows that high-need students don't always have access to supports they need to achieve these outcomes. I think that does have a lot to do with our overall level of investment in public education. But in addition, there are some instances where kids don't always have equal access to the core program, especially when you measure it by actual expenditures at the school site. So having this understanding and this frame around what vulnerable students need, there is a focus on what the state's role is in terms of strategies and policies that can be put in place for greater assurances. It's also important to note that as we talk to stakeholders across the state, there is broad and strong support for focusing on student outcomes, and that being the measure by which we measure success. I mean, I think there are multiple groups and individuals who are very supportive and focused on that issue. And there is as we're currently in the policy context, we're in this interesting time where it's against a backdrop where we're making some important changes. I mean, we're making this exciting shift to Common Core implementation, and with that, changes in our assessment system, our accountability system, which means that information that would potentially be used by the state to intervene in low-performing schools and districts may not be available for several years. And so within that context, I think there is a focus on the state's role around resource allocations. In addition, one of the things that we're hearing from folks on the ground is that having clear rules will help create greater transparency, which is a core component around real community engagement and maintaining public trust. So as we move forward, we're all very focused on ways to weave these important perspectives and goals together as the state develops implementing regulations around LCFF. And so what we'll do now, Debra's going to walk through some of the key decision points that are embedded in creating the fiscal regs, and as well as some of the different policy solutions that have bubbled up in the course of our conversations collectively around this issue.
Yeah, so there are, so the key issues that are before the board, there are really two key decisions that are before the board with regards to LCFF. And so the first is adopting those fiscal regulations by January, and then adopting the local control accountability plan. And so with the fiscal regulations, they really have to define some key questions that the legislature left for them to define. And so it was really, what is increase or improve services for unduplicated peoples? So what does it mean, and how do you define those key provisions for English learners, foster youth, and low-income students? And how do you do that in proportion to the increase in funds apportioned on the basis and number of the concentration of unduplicated pupils. And then providing for the district-wide, county-wide, and school-wide purposes in a manner that is no more restrictive than the restrictions provided in Title I. And so today we're going to try to take a deeper look at the first of those decisions. So those are the development of fiscal regulations that'll govern the use of the supplemental concentration dollars that'll be generated by low-income English learners and foster youth. And so the key questions in crafting this, and the first three questions, so the next three slides really build upon each other. So it's answering one, trying to define one question, and then moving on to the next. And so within that, how should the state determine the starting point for measuring services for unduplicated students? And because the statute references a higher level of service, it implies that first the state will need to figure out what the current level of service is for low-income English learners and foster youth. And so an example of a previous categorical program targeted to low-income students is economic impact aid. So it's figuring out what that starting point is. And so some questions asked was defining service levels for what a core program is for all students, and additional services would be considered supplemental. So it's really focusing on that most basic or core program and that all students would receive regardless of the needs that they bring with them. And then once you figure that out, then it's defining what the supplemental services are. But the starting point would be figuring out that core program. And another way of looking at it would be the funding levels from previous categorical programs that were focused on the student population. So that would be looking at the revenues districts got. And the example I mentioned earlier was economic impact aid. So that was a program that was driven by student characteristics. And so is that an appropriate starting point? Another way of looking at it would be from the perspective of expenditures and how much districts were spending on those students. So regardless of the dollars that they received, how much were they received from the state and local sources, how much did they actually spend on these students? And so there are three different ways of determining that starting point. And so you can see we've sort of broken them down by starting from a programmatic level, a level of revenues, or a level of expenditures. And then again, building upon that, so now that you've decided what that starting point is, it's really what is the final target for increased and improved services when the funding formula is fully implemented. So for example, you don't have you could always say that we don't have a specific fiscal target, and just over time during this transition, there's a demonstration of increased services over existing offerings. And so it's just measuring an undefined increase. Another way of looking at it would be assurances that the supplemental concentration funds are used for the sole benefit of low-income English learners and foster youth. And so, and then a third way would be assurances that in addition to supplemental and concentration funds, high-need students have proportional access to the core program. And so those are, these represent some of the suggestions that have been provided by stakeholders throughout the process in a way of answering that second question about what's the target. And so then, so once you've established those first 2 points, it's from there that you can look at how a district should demonstrate they're making the proportional progress towards increasing the services for those students. And so a way to look at that is varied, but starting with that first question, so that's starting with the that core, that foundational program, and then defining what that target is. So one of those different ways of looking at that target. And so a way of figuring out the proportional progress or increase could be services. The district could demonstrate that the services provided are increased above the service levels each year. So it's looking year to year and defining increases. Another way would be looking at the resources, so revenues or expenditures, and provide districts with flexibility on the level of funding each year, but ensuring that those are increasing. And then setting, another way would be setting those annual increases based on the funding the district receives. So as we transition districts should be allocating those resources based on how they received them. And so those are different ways of answering those first couple questions. Now looking at another way is how to address that school-wide, district-wide, and county-wide question, and what would be allowable uses for supplemental and concentration dollars for school-wide and district-wide efforts. The statute states that the increased services for unduplicated students should be no more restrictive than Title I, but the language provides a lot of ambiguity. And this suggests a sort of a range of options that the state board could look at. So an example of that should there be a specific proportion of students generating supplemental concentration funds before that funding can be used for school-wide purposes. So should that be used at setting, should we establish threshold amounts? And the same question could be answered for district-wide purposes as well. And so at what level of student population should you have, what percentage of your students comprise of those high-need students should you have before you allow those uses, and should you? And then if you answer that, how should that be defined? So should the state define what types of school-wide and district-wide services are allowable, and then conversely, which ones are not? And if they do, and then what should those be? What programs and services should be allowable, and then what should not be? And then what the parameters are in place if they're to be placed on allowable uses. And if there are differences in the parameters of the definitions for supplemental or concentration funding. So that has hopefully laid out the framework for the conversation, which we're trying to get across, is staying engaged in the process. And so Samantha's going to talk about different ways to stay engaged in the state process.
So where do we go from here? Now that we have a sense of the deliberation and the varying perspectives that are important towards moving this forward, and the key decision points that are before stakeholders and the board, there are several upcoming things that provide an opportunity to stay engaged. So first, we know in talking with WestEd and the State Board of Education that several policy options are being developed as straw man proposals to begin really vetting with the field and sharing now. And so in the next couple of weeks, we will have those policy options. We will make sure to share it with everyone who's on this webinar, everyone who's part of the children's movement, who's signed up to the weighted formula newsletter that we also send out, so that we can get this out broadly. And I know that our partners and state-level stakeholders are similarly going to be doing that with their various constituencies to make sure that people can engage in this conversation and know what the different options are that are being discussed. In addition, the California Endowment is generously offered to sponsor some additional community forums in partnership with the State Board to begin continue to engage folks throughout the state. We've heard that there may be as many as 10 forums up and down the state at times that are very convenient for students and parents and community members. So in the evenings, on the weekends, there'll be translators and childcare available with the hopes of really turning out and engaging the stakeholders throughout the state who care about these issues and who are going to be at the forefront and implementing them. In addition, WestEd has an online feedback option. The email is up there for your convenience, where they're collecting feedback from the field, and that is being coded and provided for the board so that there's a good sense for all the different recommendations that have been laid out. In addition, in terms of the formal schedule, the state board's next meeting is November 6th and 7th, and it will provide an opportunity for the board to see these early policy options that have been developed based on their initial feedback in September and feedback from stakeholders, as well as feedback that's being received through the vetting process. And it will give them an opportunity to opine on the direction and hopefully give the field a good sense of where the board is moving, so that in January, when the final regulations are available and will be adopted, there's been a lot of opportunity for input. In addition, as Debra mentioned, the local control and accountability plan also needs to be adopted. We've heard that that an early viewing of that may similarly show up in January, with the adoption process happening by the deadline in March. So there are lots of opportunities to stay engaged at the state level, and we've talked a lot about what we don't know and what's still in process, but there's also a lot that we do know, and there's a lot that local communities can be doing now together to really begin the implementation of LCFF. And so here's a quick chart with just a few of the high-level things that we do know and some education code references, so that if you want to pull up the bill and actually, look at the law around some of the technical aspects of it, that's there for your convenience. So we know that there are requirements around community engagement, and there are baseline requirements, and there's a whole lot more that districts and communities can do together. And so we'll also talk about some of those promising and best practices that we're seeing up and down the field. In addition, we know that the new requirement for the LCAP, this plan that cuts across these varying priorities at the state level and any local priorities, is going to be linked to the district budget, and so that's a new dynamic. We'll talk a little bit about that. In addition, there are some new requirements within the law around foster youth, and so for the first time, foster youth will actually be included in our accountability system at a district level, so that if there are more than 15 foster youth in the district, that data will be shown. And the state agencies actually have a requirement to begin sharing data to help districts actually identify their foster youth, because that's one of the big issues that we see in the field around providing supports and services, is actually just knowing who our foster youth are. So there are three critical themes that we want to share today as we are talking about local opportunities. LCFF creates some real opportunities to first focus on some long-term multi-year planning, two, to really implement early, ongoing, and meaningful communication and engagement with community, parents, students, educators, community leaders. In addition, this issue of leveraging the requirement of linking the overall district and school site planning efforts with the budget has the potential to really be something that's powerful at the local level. So this first issue of focusing on long-term multi-year planning. Historically, just by given the way that the state budget works and timing issues, it's often been the case where we have a general sense in January what the dollars are going to be for school districts, and by May revise an even better sense of what the levels are going to be, and then finally in June, final adoption. Sometimes that was in late summer, but where districts would have a sense, and charters and county offices would have a sense of the amount of resources that they were going to have for the budget year. And sometimes planning, because of those timelines, made it very challenging to think about planning on the front end related to resources. LCFF helps change that dynamic. It doesn't change it perfectly. I mean, we're still going to go through the state budget process, and there'll be some level of uncertainty every year. But what LCFF does is set a multi-year target. So when LCFF is fully implemented, we know what the target amounts are for every district, charter school, and county office in the state. And so there's an opportunity to think about, what is our vision for when LCFF is fully implemented? What are the outcomes that we want to see for our kids? What are the strategies we want to put in place and the programs that we want to put in place to reach those outcomes? For example, a community could identify that as they're looking at kindergartners coming in, there are a number of students who aren't school ready, and so they identify this as a core need. And maybe their long-term vision is to have early learning and development programs for all kids, or for high-need students as defined by low-income, foster youth, English learners. And so that's the longer-term vision. Well, you have that opportunity to lay out that vision, and then the LCAP is also a really important element. It's a 3-year plan, so it's the these are the specific things that we're thinking about implementing in the next 3 years to fulfill our vision and the outcomes for kids. And we know they're along 8 priority areas, and we can develop some local priority areas. So you could think about what are the intermediary steps that we believe we could accomplish over the next 3 years as we move forward. And again, if we were using early learning as an example, you could begin identifying, what are those strategic things that could be done in the next 3 years to put that vision in place. And then specifically, the district each year, and charter and county office, is going to have to adopt their budget, and their budget and their LCAP have to be aligned. So again, this is the deployment of the resources that you can use this year, but hopefully those are strategic investments that are building towards a longer-term plan for where the district and community groups and parents and students want to see the district move. So it creates a real opportunity to change the dynamic and create these multi-year plans. So LCFF also really represents this incredible opportunity to engage communities in authentic ways. Students and parents, educators, community leaders are in a very good position to provide important input and guidance on the goals and strategies that are going to meet local needs and achieve the kind of outcomes for kids that we collectively want. In order to create that opportunity, it really is important to build understanding and to engage folks, because we're making this important investment in public education after many years of cuts, but we all know that it's a relatively small investment for this first year, and there are still scarce resources at hand. So being strategic about how you prioritize those resources and really engage all of the partners so that it is clear how decisions are being made and why key investments are being made at a given time, especially in this first year, so that there's the building of trust and common understanding. So we thought we'd lay out just a couple of tactics. Again, these aren't required. Some of them are, there's elements that relate to what the law suggests, but they are also just ideas that districts and communities can pursue together to begin building those structures to support engagement. So some of the ideas would be, identifying your staff community liaisons so that you are opening those lines of communication and have some formal structures in place. You may think about whether or not you need different liaisons to ensure that you're reaching targeted groups. So for example, at the county level, there are foster youth coordinators that have been around for a while and have data on foster youth and services, and so they're good partners to reach out to. Many districts have parent liaisons and special liaisons to communities that speak different languages to make sure that they're accessible and that there's a trust level built to really engage. In addition, the law does require parent committees, certainly at least one committee at the district level, and if there's a certain percentage of English learners in the district, an English learner committee. School sites up and down the state also have school site committees in place, and so now is a good opportunity to review the structure and function of those committees to see if there are things that need to be adjusted so that there's better alignment to what we're trying to achieve under LCFF. Along those lines, there are site plans up and down the state, and this is one of the pieces that the state is going to be taking on and trying to think through as well, but we encourage locals to begin thinking about it. In addition, we have site plans, we have the district LCAP, how do we create some coherence so that these aren't moving in different directions and that they're building on one another? And so there's an opportunity there to really create some connections and coherence. In addition, this is a real opportunity to reach out to new partners. Again, on the foster youth side, now that we're going to hopefully have more data around who our foster youth community is, there are social workers and attorneys that can be partners. There's also something called an education rights holder for our foster youth, And one of the challenges we found is the difficulty in identifying who those education rights holders are often, but it's something to think about and figure out how to implement locally because this is an important subgroup to begin thinking about the types of services and programs and supports you provide. In addition, there's a real opportunity here to do some district-wide and school site level community forums. You know, educators and community leaders, we're all going through a process of trying to get our heads around what LCFF means, understanding what we do and what we don't know. Those conversations can lay the groundwork for building and maintaining some trusting, open relationships between the different stakeholders. In addition, along these lines, and I think this is something we all know, that trying to translate the materials that describe what's in the law, what the vision is, in a way that's accurate and accessible. And that's often challenging to do, to make sure that we're really reflecting what is currently in statute and what is currently in place, and also at the same time making it really accessible and understandable so that folks can authentically engage. So finally, you know, we know there continues to be a lot of uncertainty, as we were saying, about what's not known, but there is a lot that is known, and one of the things that we are seeing on the ground around communities that are really trying to figure out how to connect the dots is that in order to authentically engage community and parent groups and students in the process, you've got to begin early because of just the way the budget timelines work. And that often one of the most effective ways to set up the conversation is really around these goals. What our priorities are, what are we trying to achieve, and what strategies do we think are going to be the most effective in order to achieve the goals that we've outlined and the outcomes that we've outlined. And then knowing that we have scarce resources, beginning to prioritize. You know, what are the high leverage strategies we can invest in this year? What are the high leverage strategies that we can invest in over the next 3 years? And then ultimately, you know, what do we want to broadly achieve? So in order to do that, you know, again, having a conversation around goals and begin developing your budgets now in the fall so that you can really engage community groups as we move along. So we believe that the time really is now to begin building these structures and relationships in order to achieve the vision in LCFF, and are grateful for all of the community groups and district leaders and educators across the state who are already taking on the mantle and really running with it and implementing some good programs and approaches locally. I'm just flashing up on the screen really quickly some resources for folks. The CDE has built a LCFF webpage. They have a email where you can send questions, and they also have a listserv where they're sending out updates on FAQs and you know, various bits of information. So that's a useful one if you want to stay plugged in to a lot of the different materials that are being developed. In addition, WestEd has pulled together an LCFF implementation page that has little vignettes and videos and other helpful information. In addition, we have our website, and as well as the California Weighted Formula website that we've been hosting with some materials that we'll keep updated. Again, most recently, you know, in the near term around these policy options and the different community forums. So with that, we thought we'd open it up to questions. On the screen, hopefully as a helpful resource, is some common acronyms in case we made the mistake of using them throughout the presentation, and quick definitions around a few things. But with that, I will turn it over and see if we can get a couple of questions going.
When would school districts receive funding? I had referenced that it likely wouldn't be until July when districts would know how much funding they would receive. And so I should have been clear that that doesn't mean that districts are not getting any of their funding. What the Department of Education did is they sent out money, and they're planning to continue to send out money to districts on schedule. And so in July they received their advanced apportionment. And what they did is they made that based on last year's funding levels with the intent to true up throughout the process. The challenges has been shifting to the funding formula has required some sort of systems shifts within the Department of Education. And so they're working diligently to try to provide districts with at least the information that they know how much money they're going to get, And that may not be until July, but districts will continue to receive funding. It's just, as the department noted in a memo that they sent out to districts this past July, they shouldn't use that for budgeting purposes. There are other resources available, but the department is providing updates on that LCFF site that was on the previous slide. So hopefully that will be a resource to folks to know at least when districts will know how much their LCFF dollars will be this year. But they're certainly still receiving funding from the state, because obviously they have to make their, they have to do payroll and make their allocations. So they are still receiving dollars. It will just take some time to, like I said, true all of that up.
Great. And then another question that we received is, can you address how or if LCFF can be used for early intervention, early childhood education programs? So specifically, can they be used for early learning? And the question is yes. I mean, the answer is yes. We know that there is sufficient flexibility within LCFF that if a local community and district identify that need, they could certainly make it a local priority. We also, the different state priorities, there's 8 state priorities that are outlined in the LCAP that speak to early learning and development as well. So there's a goal around student achievement and outcomes. So, how they're doing on the standards, how they're, are they ultimately graduating, and there's obviously lots of research that demonstrates that early learning programs can contribute to that. Similarly, there are priorities around parent engagement and parent involvement, and we see that a lot of high-quality programs really help parents understand, the how to be involved and begin valuing that process. And so there's some other linkages that could be made there. We know that there are communities up and down the state who are already starting to assess their existing investments in early learning, so what they're receiving from federal dollars, what they're receiving from other state dollars that are outside of the K-12 apportionments, and looking towards that long-term vision. Where do we ultimately want to be? And in some cases, looking backwards about the cuts that were made over the last several years and where they had to make some cuts to services, and in some cases that was around early learning and development. So building those programs back up and potentially having a fuller vision around access and quality. And so again, what are the strategic investments that could be made this year or in the next 3 years? A lot of those conversations are happening. And so that was a long answer for the simple question of whether or not funding can be used for that purpose.
Okay, so another question, Sam, that's come up is, are you seeing anything on the ground about what districts are already doing? So some examples of.
Yeah, we're seeing some really good work already happening. One of the things that I think districts have been doing early in the process is having these community-wide forums, so district-level forums, and the commitment to doing a roadshow to their various school sites, just to explain what's in the law. What this means in terms of the shift, this kind of historic shift in California. Why we made this shift, what we do know about what the law requires, and we've seen peppered in those conversations a description of where the district currently is as it relates to their fiscal context. So talking about the reserve levels, talking about the magnitude of cuts that were made, talking about the opportunities around supplemental concentration dollars, and that those investments, what it will yield in terms of student outcomes. And so, really trying to engage parents and community groups who, weren't tracking the LCFF as a broader movement, but now it's coming to the ground, and trying to understand what it could mean. And I think where we've seen this done well, communities and districts are also talking about this issue of what we know and what we don't know, and that those are good conversations to have, because it helps build transparency and helps build trust. So those are some of the early pieces that we're seeing put in place. We'd also love to hear examples of work that you're seeing on the ground of where some practices that are being implemented, because I think there is this desire to share among communities and really support each other's learning, given that this is a new dynamic for us in California, and we're hoping to leverage it towards this broader vision.
Okay, we're pulling up some couple other questions that have been coming up. So,
okay. Oh, so one of the questions is around the district budget development timeline. Actually, I might defer to you on this one, because so we know that, I mean, there's some statutory things around when the district has to make certain decisions. So in terms of kind of historically how this plays out, in January, what typically happens is the state will release the forecast around what is anticipated in terms of state-level funding for schools, and districts can do their individual district calculation to give them a sense of where things are going. In March, there are some deadlines. If there are cuts that are going to occur, where there's a March 15 deadline, that's important on that front. And then in May, you know, we have the May revise, where we get some additional information on the current dollar amounts, which are much closer to where things are going to ultimately be. Districts are required to adopt a budget July 1st?
By June 30th.
June 30th for the next fiscal year. And then there's a process where it goes to the county office for review and, is it certification?
I think so. So what districts will do, just kind of backing up to May revision, because the state budget isn't typically adopted before June 30th, and as Sam mentioned, for a long time it wasn't adopted till well after, and so districts will adopt their budgets based on the May revision funding allocations. And so they'll do that by the end of June. There's a process, and then they submit those to the county Office of Education for review and approval. And then there's a process by which they can make revisions 45 days after the budget that allows them to address any differences between the May revision and what the ultimate final budget is.
And that's a representation of how budgets have happened in the past, and kind of the legal timelines. Districts and communities can work together to change some of the dynamics around budget planning and adoption. And our earlier comment about starting in the fall was really this opportunity to engage students, community groups, parents, educators at school sites in the process of developing broader goals about, you know, what we want to see in terms of student outcomes. How does that link to the state priorities and the local priorities that are of interest at the local community level, and then to do the work around creating agreement around those outcomes and goals, and then thinking through, you know, what are the strategies that are going to help us reach those outcomes for kids. And that, a lot of that can happen in the fall, and even the beginnings of starting to prioritize those strategies. And then once we have a greater clarity around the amount of actual dollars that are going to come into the school site, then you go through the challenging process of taking those scarce resources and applying them to the priorities that are developed in concert with community and parents and student groups and district leaders and educators to make sure that there's broader buy-in. And we've seen, on the ground examples of, in districts where they've gone through this process, and it really does help build greater trust and commitment to the decisions that are ultimately made. Even if we can't have everything that we want right out of the gate, people understand why varying decisions were being made and what the longer term vision is.
So I think regarding some more on the transparency and finding out how much money districts will get, will there be any requirements for the budget-related information that districts provide on their websites, and how easy is it to access, and how often must it be updated?
So we know that the budget and the LCAP will have to be adopted together. So the LCAP, the Local Control and Accountability Plan, has to be at least one public hearing prior to the adoption of the budget and the LCAP, providing folks an opportunity to provide input and written comment and responses to those written comments. And then the budget and the LCAP will be adopted together. There is a requirement in the law that those be posted on the county website, or that they go to the counties and the counties will make them available. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So I would add, along with the looking at again this tighter, much tighter linkage between the plan and the budget, and to the extent that when developing the plan and doing the updates on the plan, that districts do have to provide some expenditure data. And so I think the ideal thing would be that those are linked, and you could use the plan to find out, you could get that transparency. That's certainly the goal that we've been pushing, is to show those resources and the allocation of resources and the expenditures would be closely linked with the plan.
And related to that, there's a question regarding the breakdown of the base dollars, the supplemental, and the concentration dollars for school districts. So we know the ultimate, once LCFF is ultimately implemented, we know those breakdowns, base, supplemental, concentration, just by the virtue of how the formula works. There's been some conversations that in the short term, whether or not those numbers are going to be released, and I think part of what's is part of the context is that the regulations that the board adopts in January may affect in the short term how those dollars are coded. So it's something that we're tracking closely, and we'll continue to keep folks aware of, and know that it's an issue that many have brought up. Similarly, they're asking whether or not there's a easy-to-use calculator to determine the amount of funding that each community, so each district, each county office, each charter school will receive. I know that there's one that has been developed. I believe school districts are utilizing that calculator, but I don't believe it's yet posted. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't believe so. So I think that's a question that needs to be addressed along with the first question about the breakdown. Some of that is, I think, still in the works, and hopefully will be answered in some way.
Okay, great. And then one of the there's two final questions. One was related to in presentations to school boards, how do you frame LCFF in relationship to Common Core so that they reinforce one another? I think that's a great question. As folks may be aware, that in addition to adopting LCFF this year, we also made an important one-time investment in Common Core, so to the tune of $1.25 billion to support districts and county offices and charter schools get up to speed on implementation, and so that could be used for technology, for professional development, and instructional materials. These two things are very much interrelated, because embedded in the local control and accountability plan, actually one of the key state priorities is around the implementation of standards. And the Common Core standards are the adopted standards by California. In addition, in September, it was very exciting. We also adopted the Next Generation Science Standards as part of California's standards for what students should know and be able to do. And so this is a core priority of the local plan. And there is some transparency that the districts will have to report how they're going to use the $1.25 billion for Common Core, but these things can be very much interrelated and reflected in the LCAP plan as well. So with that, I think I'll turn the last question over to Ted.
Yeah, we have time for one final question. Where would I find the most discussion points or LCFF provisions that might affect ELD programs? We are actually going to be putting together a toolkit and some messaging points directly related to ELD and LCFF, so we will be able to get those to you shortly. And along the lines of coming attractions, we will be doing a third webinar, which we will announce to you the date of that soon. We'll also be emailing out this webinar, and you'll be able to access it on the Children Now site as well once that's put together. So I want to thank you for your time and look forward to staying in touch with you, and we'll be giving the announcement of the next date shortly. And
I just also wanted to make sure we thank all of the staff and our partner organizations that helped us pull this presentation together. This could not have been done alone. There were a number of staff at the Children Now offices who helped with the design and the content, as well as Lucas Public Affairs, Pivot Learning Partners, and the National Center for Youth Law were all contributors to content. So thank you all for your support, and thank you all for participating in today's webinar. We really appreciate it.